even if you are not necessarily in this region, as someone who maybe has ancestors from this region, then this might be interesting for you too, because it does kind of show the evolution of how practices that we have today came about. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ella, and for today I have a book review for you of Alpine Witchery, Austrian folk magic, lore and spellcraft by Christian Brunner. Now, I was really kindly gifted this, sent this to me by Llewellyn, the publisher, because essentially, little short story over here, I saw this book on my Instagram feed when it came out, which I think was last autumn or around that time, and I was like, oh my god, that looks so good, I need it. Because essentially, I live like so close to the Austrian border, and like I get messages every day that are like, welcome to Austria. These are, you know, your text message like prices. So, and of course there's a lot of shared culture, there's a lot of shared history, traditions and language that we have here in Bavaria with Austria, especially in Lower Bavaria, which is where I am at. We're really close to the Alps, and I can actually see them. On a nice day, we're able to see the Alps. So I thought that this would be great. Now, another thing I want to note is there is not a lot, especially not in English, about any sort of German slash Alpine slash Austrian witchcraft magic folklore. There is and there isn't. It's kind of one of those topics. This is such a rant now, but here you are. There is not a lot of good quality stuff in German or even English for this area on witchcraft, I feel like, that is specific to witchcraft. There of course is a lot of historical documentation of like the witch trials, which I'll get into in a moment, because it features a lot here, which I love. There's of course anthropological work, there's of course, you know, legends and folklore and books on that topic that, especially in German, do definitely exist. If you're interested in that, I do have a recommendation for German folk magic video here on my channel. I'll link it in the description box, or it'll be on screen, which I think it is up here. I think I'm not sure, but yeah. Also my hair, I don't know what it's doing right now. I washed it this morning and then I just blow dried it and now it's like a mess. Anyway, ignore that. Back to this book. I got so excited. It did take me quite a little bit to actually end up finishing reading it because of a health situation that I had with the hospital and everything, which, you know, just, and then I kind of got into like a little bit of a reading slump, but slump? Is that how you say it? I'm not sure. Anyway, to this actual book. Now, why I think this is actually a great addition and so cool is it's kind of, at least to my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I'm always looking for good quality books, it's kind of the first one on this type of topic within this area that is actually good. Because we do have books, especially sort of in German, on like witchcraft, but they're the most new age, they're the most like, they're not good. To be honest with you, there's a couple of books even by like big name authors, and I don't want to like throw anyone under the bus here, but they're just not my cup of tea. They're very new age, they're not really based on like historical type of, you know, magic. They're not really, they kind of call themselves, and that's kind of the issue that I personally have. It's like calling itself like ancient or like rooted in German like magic, you know, like old German magic, and then there's like no historical basis for any of them, and that I think is a little bit irritating, where it's like, okay, it's one thing to have like a German book on magic and you are clear about the fact that the spells in this they're new, or, you know, whatever. That's not a problem. But what I do definitely have a problem with is just like trying to pass off new age stuff or spells that are very new, that probably are very heavily Wicca inspired, old traditional folk magic from this region, from Germany or neighboring German speaking countries. That is where I'm like, really? Anyway, so this book is great because it doesn't do that. So what I really appreciate, and I will say I am so pleasantly surprised because, and I know this is going to upset a couple of people, especially the Americans, I am sorry, but there's a thing where Americans are writing books on various European cultures, and they've not actually lived or experienced those cultures properly. And what I mean by that is like longer than just a vacation or like 2-3 years, like properly been immersed in that culture. And it's irritating, to be honest with you, because it's one thing that I absolutely agree. You should be writing on the diaspora of, for example, you know, what it is like to be in America or being an American in part of a diaspora community of, you know, those cultures. That's really cool. I love that, and I think there should absolutely be space for that. But it is irritating when an American kind of, I don't know, presents themselves as like part of a European community, and then you find out that it's just not really authentic, and that is then a little bit annoying. So Christian Brunner, I was so pleasantly surprised. He actually grew up in Austria, you know, he actually like spent a large time of his life in Austria. I actually listened to a podcast recently with him, and he still has that Austrian accent, and something about that made me really happy. So it was just kind of like, okay, it just gives you that feeling of like, okay, you know, you're more likely to know what you're talking about like the cultural traditions and stuff like that, because you've actually spent time here. You actually know these people, you know, and that definitely comes through in this book as well. Okay, now actually about this book, because I feel like I've been rambling for quite a long time now. What I really appreciate is we got a really great introduction. He kind of really goes into, this is really about like the folklore and the magic that is based on the witch trials and the trial records that we have. And we have a lot. And what is interesting with the witchcraft trials is a lot of times they obviously were questioned under duress and things like that, or, you know, because of their circumstances they were persecuted as witches. But there actually are a couple of witches, like a couple of people down here actually did practice witchcraft, and I love that. So not for them necessarily, but I appreciate that that was actually part of this entire introduction, where he kind of goes into the historical part of the trials. What would have made you been accused, like what would have gotten you accused, the different factors, you know, obviously being a woman, or being, you know, like a war veteran that maybe you've lost a limb and then you've become a bit of a beggar. You know, you are in a situation where you need to beg, or you are offering services that, you know, are available to you, such as folk magic, and so a lot of times these kind of things are not really addressed in a lot of books, and there's so much that I feel like actually goes into like the different factors that I really appreciate him discussing and addressing, and the minority groups and things like that that would have affected you back in the day, that would have potentially caused you to be, you know, accused of being a witch, or sometimes just practicing witchcraft, or sometimes actually being in leagues with the devil. So I really appreciate that. I also really appreciated that it was not New Age, and that it did feel very inclusive. I think that is a really good thing to be addressing, as well as we kind of like learn more in this day and age, that there are different groups of peoples that he is addressing, that he is including, and with actual like numbers and statistics and things like that. I think that is great. Now we actually then go into the different types of magic. So the large chunk of this book then are our chapters on the different types of magic, and those are really cool because essentially they are just the records, but I like that. They are the records that we have that are actually written down, which is amazing to think about that. These were in detail, like a lot of times in really big detail, in great detail, written down. And they pertain to these different fields of magic, and that is where we have them from now. And what is interesting about them, especially, which I find really interesting as well, is that there's a couple of spells in here that overlap with other regions' spells, such as England, for example, where you can kind of, or even within the voodoo and hoodoo traditions, where you can kind of start seeing like a little bit of like, oh yeah, this is probably a real spell. This is probably someone who actually practiced folk magic. This is not someone necessarily who just, you know, made something up because they were under duress, or because they were fucking with the people that were, you know, questioning them as kind of like a last act of resistance, let's say. So it's really cool to see these and to see what would have been actual folk magic back then. And then there's also a lot of things where I always find that really fascinating, is things back then that they didn't have explanations for as we do today that are considered magical back then, and today we would have like scientific explanations for them. So I love that. But let's get into the actual categories. So we have healing magic, we have weather magic, livestock magic, love and jealousy magic, curses and binding spells, and spells for all kinds of situations. And as you can see and hear, these are kind of the ones that would have been really important back in the day. Livestock magic, for example, or weather magic. I think a lot of times we overlook weather magic, how important weather magic is. I've just been to Innsbruck not too long ago, and there was the folk art museum or folk art history museum, and they had a couple of weather charms in that museum too. And it's just so interesting because that would have obviously been something that on their day-to-day basis would have been really important and would have affected their entire livelihood if, you know, something happened with the weather. And so I find it really interesting, and I find it really cool that Christian Brunner included that in here too. Now, what I then also really like is that these spells are presented in the way that they were recorded, and then Christian Brunner kind of goes a little bit into, okay, let's talk about that spell. Is it realistic? Was it probably more under duress, or is it probably a spell that was actually something that people actually did? And then if so, would you substitute anything today? There's a couple of spells where they recommend making a fumigation out of, I think it was pig poo, or ripping a chicken apart. And it's not quite clarified if it's dead or alive. Or there's just a couple of things where they are potentially disgusting. There are definitely things that the pig poo fumigation, I'm pretty sure was pig poo. I don't know if I would do that either. But then again, I do find it really fascinating how it is it's so folk magic. It's not fluffy. It kind of shows you how nitty-gritty a lot of these practices were, and how sometimes you had to get your hands dirty. So I really appreciated that. He kind of then gives a little bit of like, this is what you could substitute it with, especially if these ingredients are just like hard to come by, or are very regional, or just don't really exist as such anymore, / were terms that we don't really know necessarily 100%, or they're just like super expensive. So that I thought was really, really cool. So those are that's the large chunk of this book. We do have chapter 2 and chapter 3. Chapter 2 kind of goes into the spell ingredients and spells, as like how these spells were formed, how you can actually craft your own spells, similar to the Austrian folk tradition, that I thought was really, really cool. And obviously when I say Austrian, it's this entire region, right? It's the entire Alpine region that would have, you know, this kind of practice. And also I love that the mandrake was mentioned, because, you know, it's a nightshade that I obviously love. But the Alraune, or the mandrake spirit, is such an important and prevalent house spirit. There is one character, I don't know if you could say character, but there is a historical person who actually inherited their mandrake from their parent, and I believe that person actually, he had like a bunch of witchcraft items in his house, so we are pretty sure he actually practiced. And that was just fascinating to read about. I really, really enjoyed reading about. Then we also have in chapter 3 things like, for example, plants, tinctures, oils, teas, in infusions and things like that, brooms, different items, different ingredients, let's say, or tools, let's say, that would have been prevalent, and how you can also kind of use them or include them into your practice if that is something that you're wanting to connect with. If you are from down here, for example, or you are part of a diaspora and you do want to connect with that a little bit more, then that is something that he also presents to you on like how you can do that, which I thought was really neat as well. That's already actually it. Now, if you want to purchase this book yourself, I do have it linked in my description box. Also, definitely go check out Christian Brunner on his Instagram, and I'll leave his information down below too. I really, really enjoyed this. I can highly recommend it for you too. Even if you, I feel like this is important to note, even if you are not necessarily in this region, there are certain things where, especially I feel like as someone who maybe has ancestors from this region, then this might be interesting for you too, because it does kind of show the evolution of how practices that we have today came about. Thank you, Christian Brunner, for writing such an excellent book. So if you have any questions, or if you want to share any thoughts you've had if you've read this book, or if you have questions about this book, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments, my gosh, below, and I'll get to them. I hope you had a wonderful time watching this video. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. If you would like to support me, I do have a Patreon, which is the best way to support me, especially because YouTube just like, they redid their ad system and it's horrible. We're not getting as much anymore, so that sucks. But again, Patreon, best way to support me. I do share little clips over there that I have just discovered you can do, and I'm going to share a lot more of like extended kind of topics over there. And yeah, so if you enjoyed this ramble, head over to Patreon. I also have my Instagram, of course, linked down below, and any other social platform that you may be interested in following. I also have like a couple of different, you know, affiliate links down there if you want to have a look. And then I also have, of course, our Witchy shop, which is also linked in the description box, so you can check that out if you're looking for anything for your own practice. And yeah, with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a wonderful day or evening or whatever time it is for you. May you walk with your gods. Bye.